So we hear Jesus' words today where we're to love our enemy and we're to pray for those who abuse us and we're to turn the other cheek and we're to give without asking for a return. And I think one of the most natural questions that most people would ask upon hearing that is, why? And, I think we live in a world where a lot of times we see, at least we see and we remember often more than may be really the case, but it seems like those who break the rules, that sometimes cheaters do prosper. That it seems like those who live a life that is, goes out and seizes and takes whatever they can and accumulates whatever they can, that they're rewarded for that. That it seems like, and this is both for both men and women, but the old phrase that nice guys finish last. That people who try to do the right thing sometimes come out with the wrong results at the end. And, we live with a lot of times in a world that can be very unforgiving. We live with people who don't forgive, who hold on to a vendetta and they bury the hatchet so just far enough so they can pull it out and use it at just the opportune time. Just when we think it's no longer going to be used against us, then all of a sudden here it comes again. And in the midst of this, we are called as Christians to be gracious people, to love not only those who love us back, but to love our enemies, to learn how to forgive. Which, again, anybody who thinks forgiveness is easy has never really had to forgive something very deep. And I think one of the pieces of this is, well, why try to live this type of life? And I know one of the things that sometimes happens with this passage in Luke, people will say, well, here's the impossibility of Jesus' call for us, and so we're all in need of God's grace, which I agree we're all in need of God's grace. But we're all in need of God's grace, so why even try? And yet I do think there's something here, that Jesus wants to show us what a good life looks like, what a good life would actually be like. And I think part of this goes back to learning how to trust in God. And learning how to trust that, if I live the way that you're calling me to live, if I take this life on, if I go and I try to love my enemies, that you're going to protect me in the midst of that. If I go and I am willing to turn the other cheek, if I am willing to pray for those who speak ill of me or who abuse me, that doesn't mean that what happens is right. It doesn't mean that the world around us is always going to receive it that way. It doesn't mean that I'm always going to finish out on top, but I trust that, Lord, you're going to give me enough. And as I've wrestled with this week, part of this comes back to something that's very deeply personal for me. Why try to live this way? And I think for me, the answer comes back to some experiences I've had throughout my life where, people have been unfair to me, where I've been hurt, where I've been wounded, where I've been had to pick myself off the ground. And again, I remember a particular time. Most of you know I was divorced in 2010. I went down shortly after that time to visit my mom, and that phrase came back up of, nice guys finish last. And I wrestled with that. I chewed on that for a while, and I said, but am I willing to stop being this person? And that reality of, no, I'm not. Even if nice guys finish last, I'm willing to finish last every time to be this type of person. I'm willing to, I would not want to sell my soul to be something I'm not. I would not want to go and try to do things the way that everybody else did it, even if it meant success, if it meant trying to change who I am called to be, who I feel like I really am. And it was kind of this moment of really wrestling with and kind of coming to peace with, what? This is who I am, and that's okay. That's not only okay. I think there's a part of this that this is actually really, really beautiful. We have we had the reading a little bit earlier from Genesis where Joseph is receiving his brothers, and there's been a lot of trickery back and forth in this reading, but by the time we get to chapter 45, Joseph's brothers who sold him into slavery are now there, and he reveals himself, and they're in mortal fear of their life because they realize exactly what they've done to him. They know how much wrong they've caused him. They may not know everything that's happened to him throughout his life, all the things that he's had to struggle through to get to the place where he is now, but they know that if life was fair, he's going to punish them in a way that is going to mean the end of their life as they know. You know, okay, you sold me into slavery. Fair would be that I now take you into slavery. But Joseph doesn't do that. Joseph is able to forgive. Joseph is able to say, go, bring my father down. I'm going to settle you here in this place. I'm going to do all these things. And, you know, Joseph uses the language of God, you didn't do this, God did this. Now, I'm not willing to go as far as Joseph did on this. You know, I don't want to put every single misfortune that happens in your life at the foot of God. I think there are lots of things that happen that God can use, but God didn't necessarily cause. There are lots of things that have happened in my life that I don't sit there and blame God for, but I can also say, you know what? Because of these situations, I would not wish it on my worst enemy, but God has allowed me to grow through it. God has changed the person who I am because of these things that have happened in the midst of my life. And I think in Joseph's case, a similar thing has happened, that he is now, you know, in the midst of all of the struggles that he's been through, in the midst of all the different things that have happened in the midst of his life, now he's in this position to where he can be this vessel where God can save many other people. He can do a lot of good because of the evil that he's gone through. You know, I think one of the things that we often try to do is we try to figure out, well, what does a good life look like? You know, and I think that's one of the things that we as people of faith come back to. We wonder, well, what would a good life look like? And so we go back and, you know I'm a little bit of a strange bird that I go back and I take a book that's 2,000 years old and I try to pull wisdom out of it. I try to understand, you know, what does it have to speak to not only me but to all of us. And, you know, I think a lot of times people go back to the Bible looking for answers, and what the Bible often gives is wisdom. And that's a little different. You know, the Bible doesn't act like a checklist or something like that. It's much more, hey, come and wrestle with these. Learn these stories. Learn how to wrestle with this these things that don't all necessarily fit together easily. And from the midst of that, I do think wisdom comes. That God wants us to understand, you know, something about life. It's not necessarily, wisdom doesn't come from, you know, A plus B plus C equals D. You know, it's much more that path where you walk through and you stumble and you share and you learn and you grow. And I think that's sometimes the reason that sometimes I'll go back to something in the Bible and see something I'd never seen before because I wasn't ready to see it. That there were things that had to happen in my life to open me up to it. You know, it's hard to love your enemies. When the world tells you, you know, not only don't love your enemies, but make sure that you give more to them in retribution than you ever got. You know, don't give them justice, give them revenge. It's hard to pray for those who would speak ill of you, who would persecute you. I think it's so much easier to go that path of demonizing them and say, you know, because they're not like me, they're not somehow not human, they're not worthy of my love, not worthy of my attention. And yet, I think what Jesus wants us to see is things through God's eyes, where this person is a person worthy of my love. This person is a person who has been created in my image. This person may be a person who differs from me for very different reasons. They may have different lives, a different life that they've grown up in. They may have a different set of values they're living from. But that doesn't make them not worthy of your love and your attention. Again, it's so easy, and again, it's easy for me to kind of say, well, this is what this person can be worth to me. This is what that person can give me. And when Jesus talks about give, even when they're not going to be able to get back in return, there's that part of me that wants that control and be able to say, well, but here's how everything works out. And I think part of this is learning to trust that God, you'll give me enough. You'll give me that which I need. Doesn't mean it will be easy. Doesn't mean it will always come out exactly like you hope it will come out. You know, in a world where we value, money and fame and happiness and a well-filled belly and having more than we could possibly need at that moment, we're called to trust. And that's hard. And I think one of the other things to remember is that the very posture that Jesus is speaking this from is that posture of vulnerability. Last week I came down and I was kneeling in the midst of the congregation because that's the position that Jesus is speaking from. It's in that position to where, I think if you have someone, and even right now where I'm sitting here like 2 steps above everybody else and speaking down, you can say, well, yeah, here's Neil and he's speaking down and he's speaking from this position to where, he's not having to worry about these same things that I'm having to worry about. So yeah, right. But I do think it matters that where Jesus is speaking from down here. It's not in the position of here I am up above you, watching you and judging you where you haven't done it. But no, here's where I'm down on the plane with you. And I'm wrestling with you. And I'm going to try to love my enemies, even when they don't love me. I'm going to try to pray for those who persecute me, turn the other cheek, to give without expecting that in return. I don't say it's easy. It's a little earlier in the story, but we'll hear it in 2 weeks when we begin Lent. The temptations that Jesus tempted. Well, you shouldn't be hungry. If you're the Son of God, you shouldn't be hungry. If you're the Son of God, show us that you can do these mighty works. If you're the Son of God, you should be in charge of everything. You should have all this power and authority and everything else. Those very temptations are very, very tempting to us as well. And I think part of it is that life where we say, you know what? God, I know this is what you're going to call me. This is what you're calling me to. And I'm going to trust that as I go along this journey, as I try to live out this calling that you've given me, as I try to live into this life that I think is the life you're asking me to live, that you'll give me that which I need. In the Psalm today, Psalm 39, we hear, don't worry about the wicked, that their time eventually does come, that God eventually doesn't let everything go on forever. And, one of the things I heard last year, and I've not done as much looking at this, but I find it interesting. One of the things I heard was that as they began to look at that story about, and the story we hear about nice guys finishing last or nice men and women finishing last, it's not really true. That there are lots of times, and I think we remember those times when somebody did something wrong and they got that short-term gain for it, but in the long run, it catches up with them. Now, there are certainly people who manage to roll the dice and manage to get through life and everything seems to be okay, and they're not the kind of people who I would certainly want to model in my life. But I'm also willing to say, I think so many people think, well, the ends justify the means. I don't believe that. I think the means have an awful lot to do with what the end actually values. I think that the journey you take to get there in your life has a lot more to do than what we think and what that final result is of what people believe about us and think about us and say about us. And I will say that this is the hard choice. This is the courageous type of life. I think we often use the word courageous to talk about people who go out and they vanquish their enemies, or they go out and they take that which they see out in the midst of the world. Well, It's a lot more courageous to say, you know what? I'm going to love my enemies. I'm going to choose the way that God says I'm going to love them. You know, when a person abuses me or a person takes advantage of me, I'm still going to pray for them. I still don't want them to be condemned. I still don't want their life to end. I want them instead to be transformed, to change. I forgive not because I believe that the other person is going to reciprocate exactly that forgiveness back to me, or that that person is going to magically change, but because I do believe that there is no way forward without saying, you know, the past is the past. If I stand up here as judge over you for the rest of your life and pull out that which you've done, then I'm carrying that with me. And instead, I'm going to trust, or at least I'm going to try to. There are going to be times where I stumble and fall at this too. I'm not perfect. But I'm going to trust that as I try to live this life, as I try to engage this, that God will give me that love that I need, that God will provide that which I need, that if I give, again, this is hard for me, if I give, that there will be enough. Last week I mentioned that Luther kind of talked about the summary of the first commandment, and really all commandments after that. You know, we're to fear, love, and trust God above all things. If we get that right, I think everything else falls into place. You know, and to me, it's true. And that trusting God and saying, you know what, I'm going to try to live this life, and I'm going to trust that you're going to give me that which I need as I do this. So far, God has not let me down in that. I'm not going to say it's been easy. You know, I've not lived Joseph's life where I've had to go through that experience of slavery and rejection time after time after time before all of a sudden being in this position where I've been in that position of authority. But I do know that along the way, looking back, that God has provided, that the times where others may have prospered, sometimes even at my expense, you know, I've learned to say, you know what, that's okay. I don't have to measure my life based upon their life. Instead, I'm measuring my life based on the life that I have, and that what God has given me is enough. Do I need grace? Do I stumble and fall? Do I have times where I want to demonize my enemy or where I want to strike back at those who strike me? Absolutely. And yet I try to live this life. Not perfectly, but I try. Not because I think it's going to earn me all kinds of points with other people. Not because I think it's going to be easy. But because the more I wrestle with it, the more I realize this is who God created me. And so as we together as church, as we try to live these words that Jesus says to us, as we try to embody this way of grace and peace, and love and forgiveness, may we know God's strength. May we know Christ's courage. May we learn forgiveness and grace. That's how our God is.